And what that means is that at the end of our time together, I should be able to send you a link in case you want to look at this again or share it with someone else. I'll leave that link in place for several days, and then we'll see if I can move it to YouTube. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I hate to tell you, but as much as this is in service to you, it is certainly in service to me, because I am anxious to find out if doing virtual webinars online is a means that I might be able to reach parents, not only during this time, but beyond. I'm going to submit 2 polls for you to respond to during the course of our time together. One is looking at topics that might be of future interest to you. And then the second one, they're both pretty short. And the second one is, how did this go? Because to tell you the truth, once I'm in the format I'm in right now, I basically just see my talking face and my slide deck. So all of the things that you're seeing, I might not necessarily see. So without further ado, I would like to begin. I'm going to get a little bit of this out of my way. Okay, let's move on. First of all, I'd like to say that as a result of my work, I've had the really happy, fortuitous thing of talking with a number of families and interacting about what is going well and what is not going so well. So in the chat room where you had put some questions, your questions don't surprise me. Those are the ones that I'm hearing a fair amount. I think probably if I had to put number one issue, it'd be boys and screen time. Duh, of course. But I've been hearing a lot from families, and I've been chatting a lot with them. So that's been really great. The second thing is, as is par for me, when a topic comes up, I get interested and I start reading about it, listening about it, listening to National Public Radio on different topics. And oh my gosh, I could give you a whole listing of things that in your walks or in your spare time, cooking time, house cleaning time, whatever it is you're doing, some great things to listen to. I'll mention a couple of those. I do want to asterisk for you right now, the Legacy Project, which is coming out of Cornell Med School, and it is an interview with hundreds of elders. And they offer 30 questions that you might want to ask your elders. And in my opinion, this would be a great project to undertake for you and your kids with the elders in your family. And it's a great process for elders because it says, what have you overcome that's difficult? What lessons have you learned from that? And therefore, what advice would you give? And I think that really opens the avenue for some fantastic dialogue within families, and with, better yet, within generations. And then finally, of course, I've been thinking, what is the most positive way that we can come through all of this? Now, I have decided to divide our time this morning into 2 parts. The first part, we're going to be looking at what is called post-traumatic growth. You've heard about PTSD, post-traumatic stress, but we are going to be looking at post-traumatic growth, because right now, as a nation, actually as a globe, we're in a period that's pretty stinking traumatic. So we're going to look at that. What are the elements that we can impact? And certainly within our homes we can. Then we're going to take a little break, take a little poll, and move to part 2, which is specific tips, which I hear you and see you asking for some specifics about how can we promote growth within our home. So both of those parts I think are so good. I have to tell you, I thought about just doing one, and I had a really hard time deciding. So we're going to try and push them both together, and I hope you're comfy and have a good drink. So let's start out talking about one of my heroes. This is a photo of Marty Seligman, Dr. Martin Seligman, who, when he became the president of the American Psychological Association back in the 1990s, decided that he would found a new portion of that organization dedicated to positive psychology. And it was going to be research-based, research-driven, because he said, and you stop and think about this, is so brilliant. He said, for every one study that we have of creativity, resilience, what causes people to flourish or thrive. For every one of those studies, we have 14 or 15 on eating disorders, manic depression, suicide, self-harm, all of those. He said the psychology community has focused so much on the negative, we don't even know what healthy looks like. He is a professor at UPenn. He started an entire graduate program in positive psychology, and it is research driven. It would interest you to know that since then, several universities have followed suit, including UC Berkeley, that has the Greater Good Science Institute, again, a research institute which looks at how people do well, how they thrive, how they flourish. So why do people flourish and why? You may have read about flow. That was a piece of information that came out of that. Why do some people do well despite setbacks? People survived the Holocaust, some barely and some swimmingly. Why? Why do some people do that? How can we not just afford disaster, but how can we actually savor a joy-filled, meaning-filled life? These are all questions that lurk around positive psychology. Now, into the Middle East conflict, the Department of Defense approached Dr. Seligman and his team and said, hey, we have a question for you. And the question is this: some of our veterans come home with PTSD, and yet some people who were right next to them went through virtually the same experience, come home and do not suffer from PTSD. Is that a question that you guys could research? And of course, Seligman was on it. They interviewed more than 100,000 veterans. And that's quite a research study. And what they found was a bell curve, which shouldn't surprise you. Indeed, the majority in the middle, about 60-some%, returned to their normal level of mental health within 4 to 6 weeks, 6 months of post-combat. Okay, so yeah, they came back, they had a little trouble adjusting, but in 4 to 6 months, they were roughly back where they had been before they deployed. Okay, there was a second group, which we already know about, those people who suffered from PTSD. About 17% of that overall population came back, were familiar somewhat with their symptoms, violence, sleeplessness, delusion, startle reflex, despair, suicide. It's been a very, very dark picture of that group of individuals. What had escaped notice before that was that an equal number, on the other side of that bell curve, an equal number who experienced what Seligman and crew referred to as post-traumatic growth, meaning they had gone through that horrible, stressful experience, but they had actually come out better after deployment than they had gone in. And they might come home believing something like they were better leaders than they knew, or that they were cool under fire, or that they could help people in very, very difficult times. So let's stop and think about that. This post-traumatic growth suggests that in very difficult times, people can actually get better. Now, I don't like to equate our kids' life with combat duty, but in fact, some of them experience some things that to an 11-year-old might feel like combat duty at the lunchroom, right? So I want to drill down and look a little bit more at what we might be able to do. I don't know if y'all, arising from the period, I think it was in Vietnam, we soldiers got R&R, and R&R stood for rest and recuperation. I'd like to make it R&R, rest, recuperation, and resilience. We are in a period right now of rest, recuperation, and hopefully resilience. How could we cultivate those? And as we reframe it, what if we and our kids could emerge even better on the far side of this? What qualities could we help ourselves and our kids cultivate during this time? And in a broader sense, in what ways is adversity the path to success? I don't know if you read the New York Times about a month ago. My favorite, David Brooks, did one on using adversity as a means to flourish. And he talked about medical personnel and how they're trained to grow in times of adversity. What if we could do that with our kids? So let's take a little bit of look at this. What would it look like? I always like to think, if we got what we want, what would that look like? Your kids might get so bored that they finally picked up that instrument just to goof around, or did that project they've been thinking about doing. You might do the same. By the way, if you haven't seen on YouTube the father-daughter duet, do not wait. Do it. Wait till the end of this presentation. But then, for sure, look that up. Oh my gosh, what a treat, what a treat. And why did they do that? They did it because they were bored. There's an interview with them. And it makes you think about how this is post-traumatic growth. One of my favorite stories to come out of this was a girl, 11 or 12. Mom was telling me all the kids had to clean their bathrooms. Turns out this girl loves to clean, and she likes the way she cleans her bathroom, and it's super tidy and super organized. That's what post-traumatic growth might look like. It might look like a kid finding out that dad is always up for a game of catch after dinner. And it might look like your kid has time to call a grandparent and ask about their life experiences. As I mentioned, the Legacy Project, what they lived through, what they learned, and what advice. This is how positive growth might look. I just want to underscore that you and I sometimes get quite concerned when our kids are facing a difficulty. But I want to remind you, it is our nature to grow. It is their nature to grow, to get better, to get stronger, to get more competent. I talk all the time in my classes about competence breeds confidence. And the only way you get to competent is do something that's a little bit bigger, a stretch for you. And right now, you're sitting right at the heart, right at the spot for your kid to have to do a little stretching. This is an excellent time. And it is our nature to grow and be stronger, both ours and our children's. Now, in Seligman's research on these 100,000 folks, they identify 5 factors that were common to people who ended up in that post-traumatic growth group, okay? So let's look at what those 5 qualities were. Then we're gonna elaborate a little bit. The first one was a sense of hope that things are gonna get better, that this is not gonna go on forever. You can already hear some space for parenting, right? The second one was bravery. Now, we often think of bravery as something big and bold, but it may not necessarily be bravery with a capital B, okay? The third one was, in this Middle East deployment, these were folks who were able to find meaning or even religious belief in their being there. They were fighting for democracy. They were fighting to protect our country, whatever, okay? So deriving meaning is an important element of it. Kindness. I remember seeing photographs of US soldiers giving candy or soccer balls to Afghan kids. And finally, a sense of gratitude. Oh my. So you can see that all 5 of those elements could play very nicely into our ability to parent. So now let's talk just a little bit about the attributes one by one. The first attribute is hope. And hope begins with something we want. We want to get to the other side of this experience. We want to get to college. We want to have our kids get along better. Hope begins with something we want. And in fact, I know I'm in trouble. I know a kid's in trouble when I say, and so what are you hoping for? And they say nothing. That's really challenging. I often don't quite believe them also. So it begins with something we want, and then we begin to think of a pathway. When I'm thinking about something or helping someone think, I say, what will that look like? How will you know you have achieved that? I want to get better on the piano. I want to get better at the guitar. I want to run a faster time in track. That's pretty straightforward. What would it take to get there? And so here we've got our pathway. These are great questions for parenting, by the way. What would be some things you could do that might be able to get that better? All right. So we're developing, what do you want? A pathway. And then agency. Which one of those do you want to do first? Agency, I use a term all the time in my talks, self-efficacy. The belief that something I do has the power to impact the outcome. Whether it's getting a better grade in Spanish or perfecting my guitar or training my dog, whatever it is, that agency, there's something I can do. And you can see how important this is in hope. For example, in the Holocaust, so often hope was completely devoid, gone, missing. And it was Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, where he began to drill down and think about, how could I write a book on the far side of this experience? So you can kind of hear that down the line, what will that look like? And then what would be my pathway toward that? And with that, he began to make mental notes that took him toward a hopeful spot. Our second attribute of post-traumatic growth is bravery. And this is not the absence of fear. It's Mark Twain who said, it's not the absence of fear, it's the movement forward in face of it. And it is not the absence, but the mastery of fear. And fear can be all different kinds of things. As I said, fear could be entering the lunchroom when the popular kids are there and you don't want to. It could be daring to strike up a conversation with a kid down the street who doesn't go to your school. So I want us as parents to begin to think about, what would bravery look like right now? It might be trying a new hobby. It might be, I heard a wonderful story recently about a girl who has really, really, really admired her friend's artistic ability, but been unwilling to put her toe in the pool. Fear of comparison? Who knows? Anyway, they ordered the supplies and she's beginning to dabble and taking great delight in it. I am hearing from families as a whole that there is more time than there has been. And it's no small matter that the kids seem to be behaving as if they're out from under pressure. Wonder how that could be. So examining what bravery would look like. And by the way, a dinner conversation around this, it turns out mom and dad also have some things they need to be brave about. Mom and dad also have some fears. Now, I don't necessarily think we need to expose our concerns that would further frighten our kids, but I do think they need to understand that fear is always a part of living. It's not that we don't have any, it's that we learn to manage it. Heard a real interesting thing yesterday on self-control. That is, I feel terrified, but I manage myself to move forward. So bravery is not the same as taking stupid risks. So if your kid's doing something scary, dangerous, self-destructive, I watched a group of girls on my block the other day, little girls, for the first time trying out using a skateboard. And it was so funny because a couple of about 13 or 14-year-old boys had just gone by doing all these razzle-dazzle things. And you could see the little girls trying to figure out how they could do that. And I certainly wouldn't have advised them to try what the older boys were doing, but they did begin at their level to try and do what they were brave enough to take on. So bravery, in this case, may be with a little b. It may be with a big B. Those of you who've got seniors getting ready to launch, sometimes that takes a fair amount of bravery. Being brave enough to face uncertainty of I don't know. It seems to me that of all the things that are troubling my coaching clients right now, it's this sense of loss of control. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. Are we going to school in the fall? I don't know. Do I get to go to camp this summer? I don't know. And you and I really do not like uncertainty. We almost would prefer it be bad news that we know for sure than no news that we're uncertain about. It may be trying out getting brave enough to try out a skill he's been wanting. It may be doing a chore for the first time by herself. that may take some bravery, like walking to the post box to mail something. And I'd like to encourage you that when your kids do something that you sense is a stretch for them, that you call it courage, that a neighbor may have asked them to look out for preschool kids playing in the front yard for a few minutes while she loads the dishwasher. Your kid may feel a little intimidated by that. And later you might say, I just really admire your courage. Having you name it for them allows them to identify it for themselves and to take on the identity of, I am someone who is courageous, who's willing to take on challenging or uncertain situations. Here's some thoughts on overcoming fear. The first one is, when you see bravery, name it. I just mentioned that. The second one is, sometimes your kid doesn't have the courage to do the big thing. For example, there's somebody in their PE class that's been bullying, picking on other kids. Your kid may not today have the courage to take on the bully, but are there some steps this side of that they may be able to take on? For example, to go up to the kid later and say, I saw what that jerk did, and don't pay any attention to him. That also takes bravery. So if a kid can't take on the end brave thing, perhaps they can take on something in the mid range. Do you understand what I'm saying? And those are also signs of progress, and we can also acknowledge those. I do encourage you to have conversations like at dinner about things that the parents are fearful of. My kids right now are delighted that I'm doing this webinar this morning, because I was really afraid to do it. I mean, it's so many moving parts, and I am so not technical. And several times recently, I've thrown myself literally on the floor, and my husband will come in and look down at me and say, what's wrong? And I go, oh, death by technology. I am committing suicide by technology. And so my kids are really having a great time laughing about that, but also realizing that I am doing something that for me requires real bravery. So it's okay to share that. And I suspect I'm going to get some great emails from my kids later in the day. Our attribute number 3, back to Seligman's study, the 5 attributes. The first was hope. The second one was bravery. The third one is meaning, purpose, or even religious belief. It speaks to questions like, why did this happen? Or what can I learn? Or what is my purpose in here? Or, although this has been a bad situation in many ways, are there any good things that have come of it? Now, let me just take a little time out and say that in adolescence, as parents with our kids, we are always trying to help them look at both sides or multiple perspectives. So if they say, wow, I got to be cheerleader. Wow, that's really super. There are a lot. What's the good part about being a cheerleader? Yep. Are there any downsides to being a cheerleader? Now you have a girlfriend. What's the good part? Are there any downsides? So in this situation where it looks like it's all downside, I dare say that there are some real benefits, and that would fall under the sense of meaning and purpose. I can tell you one thing that is coming to me resoundingly is the lack of pressure at home, the time to play, eating dinner as a family almost every night, doing stuff together, like walking and going to Target. I had one mom tell me recently both of her teenagers agreed to go to Target with her. She couldn't believe it. So in all of these things, there do arrive good meaning, good benefits, good purposes. A lot of times when a kid is in a difficult situation, they may question, what if I'm not the smartest, or what if I'm not the best, or what if I'm not the lieutenant in this platoon? Is there anything I can do? And of course, the answer is always yes. We always have something we can contribute, even if it's tiny, even if we're elderly, even if we're feeling poorly. And what do I have to offer? And by the way, a conversation around the dinner table might be, tomorrow night, I'm going to ask you guys to share an answer to the following. So I want you to be thinking about it between now and tomorrow. look around our supper table. You see daddy, you see brother, you see sister. Who has a personality characteristic? Who has a way of looking at things that you wish you could borrow? I used to have a friend who would call me and say, Kathleen, I need to borrow some courage, which I just love. What do you need to borrow from somebody else in this family? And again, not their shoes, not their phone, not their whatever guitar, but what personality traits. And that allows people to see themselves a bit more clearly for purpose and meaning and so on and so forth. Can we use this season to help our kids grow in this, helping ground them in meaning and purpose? I tell you, it'd be a great time to talk about the haves and the have-nots and how this is impacting them. And do we have any role in that? And how can we alleviate suffering? And what is suffering anyway? Who do you think suffers more, the guy in the bed who's dying or the family that's talking to him on the cell phone? And depending on the ages of your kid, that is not a conversation I'd have with a 10-year-old, but I sure enough might have it with a 19 or 20-year-old. I encourage you also to put your family in a spot, parents and kids, in a spot where it is hard to miss the grandeur of something bigger. A gorgeous sky, a sunset, sitting out at night, listening. Just this morning, we've listened to a storm blow in. I've been in touch with a dad who spent the night out in a tent with his young daughter recently. They had a glorious time. He even sent me a picture of him waking up in the morning. It was darling. And she had been very eager to spend the night out. And so, by golly, they did. It was only in their own yard, but I suspect they watched the stars. I suspect they listened to the owl in their neighborhood. So take this opportunity to put yourself in the position of grandeur. And then also be looking for opportunities alongside your kid to serve others, to help them gain perspective on the world's need and their ability to help. This might be somebody younger. It might be somebody older. One year, my young teenager spent hours folding paper airplanes and then delivering them to a preschooler and showing him how you could bend the wings and get him to do loops and turns. It's all within your kid's reach. I'm not asking for a cure to cancer or COVID, but what can they do to help and what would be encouraging to other people? It's Nietzsche's quote who says, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Our kids and we need a sense of purpose to wake up to. What's on your list? By the way, one of the ways that we know to flourish and thrive and do better, many of us are making lists right now. And we're trying to balance our life with physical activity, social activity, creative activity, spiritual activity. Where does your kid need to balance on that? And we're going to talk in a minute about screens, but there is a part of that that I think has to do with balance. Attribute number 4 under Mr. Seligman's list of ways to arrive at post-traumatic growth is kindness. Kindness helps us step out of ourselves. And kindness can be within the family. We often don't speak about being kind in our family, and we often don't acknowledge it or reward it. We tend to speak angrily about unkindness. And in positive psychology, we always begin from the positive side. When you see it, reward it. When you can read into a behavior that is positive, call it out. I never will forget growing up. One of my mother's main pieces of advice, which I may tell you, I hated it, was if I was feeling glum and down in the dumps, she would say, well, you just need to go do something for somebody else. And by the time I was 10 or 11 or maybe 12 and I was into this, oh, my life is so bitter, that kind of stuff, she would say, you just need to go do something for somebody else. In fact, I am going to lock you out of the house until you can come to the back door and tell me who you helped and how. Okay, so get out, shoo, shoo, shoo. Now, we were very fortunate that we lived on a block that next door to me, a bunch of little kids lived, and they were always happy for me to turn the jump rope or read them a story or play jacks with them. And down the street, I had an elderly woman named Mrs. Groby, and if I could ring her doorbell anytime, night or day, she was very happy for me to come in and chat. I'll tell you what happened when I did those. Number one, I had to think about somebody besides myself because I had to figure out who to go see. Number two, I had to think about what might they like, what might they want. Then I delivered it, and then you know what happened. They all really liked it, and the kids didn't want me to go home. They wanted me to stay. Mrs. Gribby was so glad I'd come, and that began to fill my cup up. And I have to tell you, gosh, 60 years later, I still live by that very important advice my mom gave me. When in doubt, when you're having a rough time, you just need to go do something for somebody else. It is not serving others. It is very self-serving. It just happens to have the happy side effect. So begin thinking about that, putting that into practice, speak it. Give this as a tool to your kids. You know, I often talk about an emotional toolkit, things they can do when things kind of go off the rails. Well, things are a little off the rails right now. And so this is something they can really do. And this kindness has a great benefit. By the way, in that legacy project of interviewing elders, there were 4 very common replies that the elders gave about what advice. One of them was be kind. Number 1, it helps things go better. But number 2, it sows the seeds that may result in good things coming back to you. I wrote a blog on it recently, so you may want to look at that. To get ideas about kindness, I really encourage you to go to Random Acts of Kindness. It's a really great read and fun for you and your kids to plot out things that you could do. Plan them, go to links, make things, build things, paint things, draw things, get into it, plant things, right? And please do not miss, go to YouTube. Jot this guy's name right down right now. The name of the YouTube is The Butterfly Effect by Chris Rosati. Oh my gosh, it is lovely, lovely, lovely. Required viewing for you and for your kids. And then sit down and say, what'd you notice about this? What snagged your attention? Is there any part of that you think would be fun to do? Okay, so these are really great ways of expanding this sense of well-being, this growing toward post-traumatic strength. The 5th attribute is gratitude. And of course, gratitude always in every study is a prime determinant, a prime indicator of happiness. And it is associated with everything from lowering your blood pressure to decreasing depression and anxiety. Gratitude, if you only have one tool that arises from this conversation, I hope it would be gratitude. This is an excellent tool. You and I ought to be using it every day. So let's talk quickly about some practices of gratitude. It can be as simple as saying thanks at the beginning of a meal. And in our house, really, truly, even now, we begin our dinner meal and we alternate who does it to give 3 things you're grateful for since dinner last night. Now, sometimes it can be, thank God the day's over, thank God for watermelon, and thank God we have air conditioning. I like all of those. So we're not talking grand and glorious. We are literally looking for things to be grateful for. If in terms of intensity, as we go down the list, expressing gratitude daily, making it a goal of once a day to tell someone you appreciate something. Okay, and you can make that as a dinner challenge where you come in and say, okay, so who expressed gratitude today? Who'd you tell? Watch what happens. Feel what happens. It's like buoyancy at the dinner table. I'm not kidding. Keeping a gratitude journal is one of the first interventions in mild to moderate depression, where you get a little notebook, maybe like a little 3-ring, one of those little mini binders that you keep with a pencil next to your bed. And at the end of the day, simply write down 3 things that you were grateful for that day. And if you do that as a daily discipline, you will be astonished. Next, in terms of difficulty, is to write a gratitude letter. This would be a gorgeous exercise. Your kids are out of school. They have a little more time. What has being away from your family, your friends, your teachers, your coaches, what has that made you grateful for? I'd like you to write a letter. Simply the act of thinking about who am I grateful for and what is it I appreciate. That'd be great. Expressing it in writing, even if I never send a letter, is terrific. But then if you really want to blow it out of the sky, blow it out of the sky, I'm telling you, make a date to read that letter out loud to the person that you wrote it to. It's unbelievable, unbelievable. And I encourage you to challenge yourself and your children. You may want to begin with who's somebody you're grateful for and just talk about that one night at dinner. And if you were going to write them a letter, what would you tell them? And then, by the way, if you have graduating seniors, oh my gosh, at my house, this was a requirement the last few weeks of high school, was to sit down and write a letter to the 2 or 3 teachers that have really, truly made a difference. And I would try and sort of guilt shame my kids into saying, if you think they work for the pay, you are mistaken. They work because they care about you and they care about your flourishing and whether or not you do well. And so you owe this to them. We have ended part 1 where we were focusing on what creates post-traumatic growth. We said hope, we said bravery, we said a sense of meaning, we said kindness, we said gratitude. We talked about some things that parents can do to make that possible. Now we're going to shift gears a minute, but before we do, I hope that I am going to launch a little poll. So I'm going to ask you if you would just take a minute. I'm literally going to give you a minute to read through this and you can hopefully hit some replies. Please do that now. Are you all able to fill out that poll? I hope so. Great. Somebody says, yes, we can. Thank you. I'm going to leave this for just a little bit longer. So hopefully thank you. I see you working your way through it. I'm going to give you just another few seconds. I see people zipping along. Thank you so much. Turns out this might be a good time to give this a, this takes a little longer than I thought, so that's great. I appreciate it. I hope I'm going to be able to get, I see some questions have come in and I'm going to address those before the end. Thanks, Julie. Let me see if I can. Nope. Nope. All right. I'm going to end our poll now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody signing in. And I think I will just share the results very quickly. Everybody said, yeah, more classes. Some said, half of you said right away. Some of you said in June. Some said wait until fall. We're looking at a lot of middle school stuff, a lot of high school stuff. Ooh, that's great. And looking at some boy classes, making sense of sex, sugar and spice, improving communication. Great, I love seeing that. And then very likely in the fall, I'll be offering some book classes. So that's really wonderful to see. I appreciate your feedback very, very much. And we will now move on and we will begin part 2. I do recognize that there have been some questions asked. Let me just take a minute. Oh, somebody says I can't scroll down on the survey. I'm so sorry. Too late. Too late for that. Okay, we're going to launch now to part 2. We have been talking about post-traumatic growth, and I wanted to tell you that I began some of the coaching groups and conversations that I have been doing lately by asking the question, hold on just one second, I somehow advanced that. I asked the question, if you could use one word or short phrase to describe where you are right now, what would that be? And I wanted to share with you their replies. They were, I am relaxed. Somebody said, I just feel this absence of pressure. Some said, I feel invaded. I love that one. Out of control, confused, content, delighting in family fun, isolated, worried, 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 worried. So as you can see, it was a bit of a mixed bag. And so as we're looking at specific tips on how to make this a time of growth for our families, we're going to divide it into several things. First of all, how can your questions improve the quality of communication at your house? Secondly, how can you change the way you are listening so that things will get better at your house? Then I want to really take a close look at transitions, because that's a lot of what's going on right now, and that's what's throwing us a curveball. And then finally, we're going to look at an activity that in positive psychology is called appreciative inquiry. So that's where we're headed, and that's what we're going to be talking about. I would like to frame this conversation in the sense that your overall goal as a parent is to more and more and more see your kids taking on managing their own life, making good decisions, running the social filter to keep out stupid friends and welcome in healthy, wholesome friends, knowing when they need to go to sleep, knowing when they need to eat more or see a doctor. Your role is evolving. You are leaving the role of parent, and obviously not if they're 10 or 11, right? You're leaving the role of parent and shifting gears to become something more like a coach, an advisor, a guide. And underlying this whole transition is, how are you going to promote their thinking, their action taking on their own behalf? So that's our end game, so that we can ultimately get out of their lives with a sense of confidence. Not 100%. No kid ever gets it right, but you know what? You and I don't get it 100% right either. So we're not talking about 100%, but we're looking at the general direction of they're becoming more and more competent, right? That is our driving force. So the first thing is, let's look at some of the questions. Some of us have been staying too long in the, is your homework done? Are you ready to go to bed? Do you have your stuff set out for tomorrow? What day is your science paper due? When is that test? Have you finished the, we want to move off of those questions, because at the end of the day, when they're 30, those kind of questions are going to be irrelevant. That kind of conversation is irrelevant. So right now is a great time to begin to practice a different kind of question. And the questions here arrive from a book entitled Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And Mary Lee Adams suggests that the question we ask sets into play what happens next. So if I say to my 15-year-old boy, what do you have for homework? What's going to happen next? You already know. You know the answer by heart. He's going to shut down. He's going to keep it to himself. And he's probably going to say, I've got it under control. Butt out, Mom. Nothing, right? It was unproductive. And yet we do it again and again and again. Stop already. Okay. So she proposes some different questions. One of my very favorites with coaching clients, but also with teenagers, is to say, what is it you want? What are you hoping to make in this class? How would you like to spend today? Would you like today to be miserable? Do you need a misery day? Do you want a fun day? What would fun look like? And after they begin to think some about what they want, or you begin to think about what you want, how will you know? How will you know it was fun? I will have talked to my friends. I will have done something I haven't done before. I will have done something fun. What is fun for you? Because I would suggest knitting, but I'm pretty sure that wouldn't be fun for you. Okay. So how would you know? How will you know is one of your great parenting question tools. How will you know when you need to see a doctor? How will you know it's time to leave the party? How will you know if this friend is reliable? Now, their first reply is going to be, I don't know. But that's exactly the point, is that we want to begin to train them in that way. I was just talking with senior parents this week, and one mother said that when she first started asking this question in middle school, her kid was absolute blank. But more and more, he is able to say, well, probably this and probably that. What would be a yellow flag is another great question, or a benchmark, a yellow flag to the negative side, a benchmark of progress. For example, I'm not happy with the grade I'm making in Spanish. So what would you like? Well, I'd like a B. What do you think it'll take to get that? Well, what will be a benchmark of progress? How will you know you're making progress on that? All my homework assignments would be turned in. That's a good benchmark of progress. My grade at the end of the semester will be a B. Oh, that's a long time to wait. Is there anything between here and there? Do you hear the thought process that we're trying to initiate and imbue? One of our other great questions with adolescents is, what are they thinking? At the beginning of adolescence, I'm learning middle school, what do I think and want and feel? But in order to be successful socially in relationships of just about every kind, I also have to be able to think about what are they thinking, wanting, and feeling. My coach, my teammates, my piano teacher, my brother. And somebody said there's some friction between sibs right now. It's a gorgeous time to think about, what is your sister thinking and wanting and feeling? Again, it's likely to be, I don't know. Okay. So there are some things we can do about that. We could ask her tonight at dinner. We could ask each other if you're really having super friction. One of the ways I do is slow it down, and I ask sister to say, this is what I'm thinking, wanting, and feeling. And then I turn to brother and say, could you repeat back what you just heard? And sometimes he really did hear it and he will repeat it back. Sometimes it's all garbled. You've had this experience where you said one thing and someone heard another. And so this is a way that we clear it out. And then now, as this begins to happen, I think you're going to begin to see some compassion or some understanding for what that other person is thinking, wanting, and feeling. Again, if you see progress in this, like where your older boy is kind to your younger boy and agrees to go play with them, later circle back around and say, I'm really impressed that you know how much and he wants to be with you and play with you, because that's a great example. That is a benchmark of progress. The final question is, what are you thinking of trying next? Some things don't work. They just don't work. And so what are you thinking of trying next can be a really helpful question. This is worth the price of your ride this morning. This is some of the smartest stuff ever, coming from Lisa Damour. The book is Untangled. First of all, is my question. You've heard me ask this before. What do you need right now? When we're having a hard time, our kids are having a hard time. A great starting spot is, what do you need right now? Now, sometimes they don't know what they need. And so you have to wait and take your time. And you will try and throw some things in. Well, why don't you go out and play? Well, why don't you practice the piano? Well, what? And you know what often happens? No, I don't want it. No, that's boring. No. What do you need right now? When you hear this, no, not this, no, not that, no, not that, that's when you need to go back to this question. Now, I want to highlight Lisa Damour's delineation of the difference between complaining or venting. This is so brilliant that it pretty much changed my life with my kids. So Damour says that complaining equals somebody needs to fix this. And let me just tell you, as moms, we've been in the business for quite some time that when somebody complains, we believe it is our job to fix it. Okay? Careful, maybe not. The second thing is venting equals, I need someone who cares to hear this. Okay? Complaining, somebody needs to fix this. Venting, I need someone who cares to hear it. Now, the problem that happens very often in our close relationships is we stay too long in the first one and we think the second one is insignificant. But you know very well that it's not. And that when you're distressed about something, sometimes you just need to tell somebody who cares. That is doing something. So I encourage you to try on those two things. And by the way, this would be a great thing to share with your kids because they're doing the same thing with their friends, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. Okay. The next one is a gorgeous piece of wisdom that comes from a Philadelphia principal who asked to be assigned to the most violent high school in the United States of America. She has a terrific TED Talk. Don't you wish I could remember her name? But she is dealing with kids who genuinely come from the worst possible situations. You know, their parents are drug dealers. Their parents are in jail. Their mother did shoot their father to death. I mean, their situations are, they're getting beat up. They're suffering from incest. I mean, you name it, it's bad. And when they were getting ready to close down that school, because it was the school she had attended when she was in high school, she volunteered. And she said, if I can't get it better in 2 years, then we'll shut it down. And in her TED Talk, she said, I think everybody, parents, teachers, kids, would tell you, I have a standard mantra, and this is it. She said, when they come to tell me about what's going on, I listen. And I say, you're right. That really is bad. Oof, that is so bad. Wow. And then I say, yeah, that is sad. Oh, wow. I am so sorry. That is bad. It's sad, so bad, so sad. So what? So what are you going to do about it? Will you choose to be defined by this thing that is bad and is sad? Or will you choose to take some role to change it? You see, you and I often get caught in trying to fix it, of just going the vent and the rant goes on and on and on. We forget to say, yeah, so bad, so sad. So what? Because so what is the transition that takes us to the course of action? Likewise, our children. While we're talking about this is a transition. A transition is when we are neither here and not where we were and not quite where we're going to be. Man, are we in the middle of that right now. We are not where we were 6 months ago, nor are we where we're going to be 6 months from now. And by the way, where's that even going to be? If you think about adolescence in general, there is no period of life more fraught with transition than adolescence, right? So just right off the bat, then you add to that the current situation. We got a lot of balls in the air. Now, as it turns out, some of us love transition. We want to turn things upside down about every 10 minutes. We just think it's so fun. It's so great. It's so energizing. Some absolutely hate transition. And it turns out that even within the same family, we can have all shades on that spectrum. Okay? So some people anticipate it eagerly, some dread it, some plan and make lists and organize months in advance, some ignore it, they want to deny it's going to happen, some get distracted, some cry, some are delighted, they can't wait. It's a terrific family conversation to take a look at. How do you do transition at your house, and how do each member do it? And so as we're thinking about transition, it's also useful to remember a transition almost always includes a loss, and wherever there is loss, there's going to be some grief. So again, let's take a little look at this. Right now, we definitely have a loss of certainty, and we are grieving it. I'm not free to go out. I can't see my friends. I can't work out with my team anymore. My brother is so annoying and I have no privacy, and I'm having to do more chores. It's a loss of my free time and self-determination. Embedded in those is likely to be some grief. Is it silly to grieve at this time? When grieving happens, we're likely to see our girls crying or acting like little pouty snots. We're likely to see our boys being cranky and withdrawn and a little hostile. We often overlook the fact that mom and dad are also going through losses and grief. And sometimes it means we work harder so we don't have to feel it. And then, of course, siblings interacting together often act out their grief or their loss or their uncertainty. They use their sib as a whipping boy. And then finally, in all of this grief, I think it's very useful to remember that our kids may be feeling a level of anxiety or grief or awareness. Are my parents going to be okay? Are my grandparents going to be okay? If this could happen to somebody else, it could happen to me. So we don't want to rush through this period of uncertainty without at least an acknowledgement that uncertainty travels with loss and grief. Some conversations that you might want to have is with your family might begin with a question: when there's a big change, how do I usually react? You might think about the last time, when you went from middle school to high school, or when you moved to Dallas, or when you went to summer camp when you didn't know anybody. How long did your adjustment period take? What or who helped you? Now, this is a great place that we can get some encouragement from family. What really helped that Susie wrote me a letter at camp every week. That was really cool. And then I double dog dare you to go for, if we were going to create a bad transition, what would we include in that recipe? Okay, well, I wouldn't tell anybody. I wouldn't get enough sleep. I wouldn't eat right. I wouldn't venture out of my dorm room to meet new people. I would just curl up in my room and just be sad and cry all the time. So that our kids begin to contrast what's the difference, and that it's actually taking care of yourself to steer clear of that bad recipe. I love the idea of a bad recipe for X, being a bad roommate, being a bad brother. What would be in your recipe for being a horrible brother? That's going at it backwards. Some continuing conversations is, what other transitions do we expect in the next few years? Are there ways that your family has helped you in the past? How might they help you now or in the future? And one question I really love, and this begins to roll us to the next topic, which is appreciative inquiry. What did you see somebody in our family do this week that you really love seeing? Appreciative inquiry is asking questions about the good stuff. What's good? What are you proud of? What's admirable? What's going well? What are we doing right? You are going to feel the most amazing lift of energy when you move into this arena of appreciative inquiry. What have been the high points of the last month? What are you really glad that we got to do with this whole COVID-19 thing? Do you hear where we're going with that? So you're going to do that. And again, I would throw gratitude practices back in there. Give thanks at your meal. Keep a daily gratitude journal. Put one on your refrigerator door, and people just write stuff that they're grateful for. Make a challenge. Things I'm grateful for outdoors today. Things I'm grateful for in my tummy today. Get people thinking in more than one venue. And as we think about this overall talk in the webinar today, we talked about post-traumatic growth. We talked about how we can improve our questions, how we can listen, complaining versus venting in a better way, how we can understand transitions, loss, and grief, and finally, how can we circle back and pick up the positive? Now, I'm going to ask you for a 2-second poll. And I'm going to launch. No, I don't want to do that one. I thought I was going to. I'm just going to show that one real quickly. I'm going to stop the sharing. Maybe I'm not going to launch that other one. Hang on just one sec. Guess I'm not. Well, What I was wanting to know is, how has this platform worked for you? And on a scale, what, were you able to get in fairly easily? Was it a hassle? And then number two, based on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 is I would never come to another seminar like this, to 5 was yahoo, can't wait to do it again. How would you rate this? So in just a minute, we'll put that in the chat. I will leave the chat open for a bit, but right now I want to pick up some questions and answers, and I'm hoping that you will not need to text me because that'll take me off my screen, but you can either put it in our chat box or I can pick it up off of our Q&A. So I'm going to open our Q&A right now. Would I be willing to do a Zoom for kids? Somebody has an 11-year-old who's starting junior high. Could we do this kind of thing for kids? I could get a group together. Clearly, we would pay for it. I'm not sure if my daughter would be comfortable one-on-one, but she might be comfortable to Zoom. It's interesting. She might be interested to Zoom because because they don't see each other. They don't know who's there, and nobody knows they're there. So they could lay really low and really quiet. I'd have to think a little bit about that. I had to tell you very truthfully that this week I am planning to head to California for the birth of my second grandchild. So I know that I'm out of commission. You'll notice that on the poll of would you like to start in June or would you like to start in the fall, I will not be starting anything in May. This is my final sign off. But I do appreciate the thought process. I wonder if it would be possible, maybe if you got the link for this and downloaded it, if there might be slides on there that you and she and a couple of her friends could look over and maybe talk about together or talk about within the context of your family. Would that be useful? I don't know if there are other questions. Okay, we'll see what we can do about those slides. Now I'm moving the chat back to where I can see it a little bit better. Okay. Somebody says I'm like the parenting Jedi. I'm gonna tell my kids that. I told you one time about the kid who said to me when I told him he couldn't date 3 girls from the same social group, and he got, oh, no problem, Miss Fish, it's okay. I'm cool, but it'll be fine. I saw him several months later. Of course, he crashed and burned all 3, and he said, God, Miss Fisher, you are like a prophet. I told my kids, I am like a prophet. So anyway, I don't know about that part. I want to say again, I want to spend just 1 second talking about boys and screens, and I would go back to that. And I've gotten several questions here about, will I send the slides out? Here is what I would like, what I believe I can do. I believe that Zoom is going to make me a link that has this whole production, in which case my narration too. I can send you that link. I can also send you just the slides. So once you get the link, if that's not what you have in mind, if you'll send me an email, I'll do my best. I think the file is not too big to send, so I sure will give it a try. I want to spend 1 second talking about boys because screens, as you know, are a boy default, and they are socializing, so I wouldn't discount that entirely. I would first of all refer you to put in your browser Screenagers, which will take you to the website for Delaney Rush, who is the physician who made the film on screens and kids. And she has a weekly blog called Tech Talk Tuesday, which will come directly to your email feed and will give you dinner conversations for not only your kids' screen behavior, but yours as well. And these really promote some terrific discussion. I think we get in a jam when we focus too much attention on our kids' screen behavior without broadening it to say, this is true for all of us. How will I know I've spent too much time? What is healthy for me? So the first thing I'd say is Delaney Rush, Screenagers, Tech Talk Tuesday. The second thing I would say is part of this conversation has to do with balance. Okay. So for example, if your kid were shooting baskets for 16 hours a day, would you think that was in balance? If your kid was reading for 16 hours a day, would you think that was in balance? So if I were having a conversation with a teenager, I would say, look, as your mom, part of my job is a healthy, wholesome life. And that means some balance, balance socializing, balance financially, balance learning stuff, balance communicating with your family, exercise, sleep, eat, brush your teeth, floss. So what are the things that are part of a healthy life? And how are you doing in those right now? One author that I like really well in the book Designing Your Life suggests that you check in on work, play, health, love. How you doing on those? And if one is out of balance, what would it take to rebalance? What will be a yellow flag that something's out of balance? What will be a benchmark of progress? And that we begin, instead of talking specifically about screen time, we begin to talk about balance. And I do think there's some socializing going on there, but I also know, I know that socializing face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball is important. You want to do it with your little sister? Fine. You want to do it with your grandma? Fine. You want to get together with a group of kids and take a 6-foot walk? That'll work for me. But there needs to be some time that's socializing that is not on the screen. I had more than one parent say this week, I'm hoping this will be the time when my kid gets sick and tired of gaming. Yeah, I hope so. But I also encourage balance, and learning something, I hope, is in there. It's a fabulous time to learn stuff. So I hope you and your kid are learning some things. Okay, let's see. I'm getting a lot of feedback about, yes, it was easy to get in. The slides were good and easy to follow. I would definitely like to do this again. I got in okay. Always grateful for time shared. Okay, and I'm seeing a lot of people who would like to get this in, so get the slides. So I sure will leave that. I am over the time. I'd hoped that we'd be able to make it in an hour. I think that we have pretty well answered. Let me see if we have any more questions that have come in. I think we've gotten the questions that are here. So I just want to say how much I appreciate your involvement, and I am hoping that we will certainly do this again. And I'd like you to reconsider your questions. In summary, I'd like you to reconsider your questions. I'd like you to think more about the difference in complaining and venting. I'd like you to put your antenna up for transitions and loss, parentheses, grief. Some of what we see in our kids' bad behavior right now may be that. I want you to look for what is going well. What's the good part? And then I want you to speak about it, encourage your kids. And then finally, I want you to see what you can do to work on your gratitude practices. I want to close now by doing a positive psychology activity that I think is at least as good for the person who does it as it is for the person who receives it. And it is called well-wishing. And well-wishing sounds like wishes of loving kindness. You could do this at the grocery store. You could do this with your mom. You could do this in an email. And it sounds like this. May you have hope to consider the future beyond the time that we're currently in a positive way. May you have courage today to bravely step to the next thing that you need to do. May, in the midst of all of this uncertainty and confusion, may you find a sense of meaning to connect you with other people around you, but beyond, to the universe and to your purpose. May you have a sense of gratitude in things tiny and things large. And finally, May kindness be poured from the world toward you, but also from you toward the world. I appreciate your kindness in joining me this morning. I'm really delighted. And I think at this point, I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you so much. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. If you want to put anything into chat, I'd appreciate seeing it. Otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing and you can look for a link from me before long. Thanks so much for attending. May you be well.